Institute, which will be taking place in Riyadh from the 4th to the 7th of December at the Radisson Blu Hotel in Riyadh. So it is my pleasure to hand this over to Howard and Joe, who will take us through the next 45 minutes to hour. If you do have questions as we go throughout the presentation, you can pose your questions in the chat box throughout, and we will answer those questions as quickly as we can. So now I'll hand it over to Howard.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. I'm Howard Rome with the Balanced Scorecard Institute in the USA, and we partner with Informa worldwide to present Balanced Scorecard training with the Association for Strategic Planning to create the body of knowledge and certification for strategic planning and management practitioners, and with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies with certification. So I'll go ahead and get us started. I always like to start with a quote, and I think this one is sort of a tongue-in-cheek, but really makes the point. However beautiful the strategy, we should occasionally look at the result. That, of course, is the hard part, looking at the result and measuring the progress along the way. It's relatively easy to measure the progress of operations and tactics and projects. More difficult to measure the success and the progress of our strategy. So let's take on some topics today in the 45 minutes or so that we have for the presentation. Measurement myths and mistakes, some of the things that we've observed around the world as we train and consult. I've got a few framing questions that Joe and I have put together to get you off to a good start with your performance measurement journey. Then we'll talk about tracking and measuring strategy execution, the different types of measures or KPIs that one can use to do that. We'll give you some tools, some techniques that you can use when you work in your organization to develop meaningful performance measures. And then we'll share some examples. Stephen Covey was right, I think, when one of his principles says, start with the end in mind. It's a takeoff on this quote. It says, managers are working so hard to be sure things are done right that they hardly have time to decide if they're doing the right things. Things done right is the operations side of the business, the tactical side of it. Doing the right things is the strategy side. And what we find is that organizations spend relatively little time worrying about doing the right things. So that's what this presentation is about, is we're working on the doing the right things side. Conceptually, let's put performance measurement in context. And what we're trying to do is answer both questions. Are we doing the right things first, and then are we doing them right? So are we doing them right, again, is the operations, the efficiency, the productivity side of the ledger, and are we doing the right things is the strategy side of the ledger. So we start with vision and mission. Those are the high altitude strategic elements that an organization has to worry. If you're building a management system, those are two of the top key components. Goals or desired results, there's a lot of different words for things in our business, as you know. Many times one person's goal is somebody else's objective and somebody else's measure. So one of the things that we advise folks when you're doing strategic planning and management is to make sure you get agreement on what you mean by the words. Get your definitions down early and right up front, so there's no confusion about the language that we're using. Once we have vision and mission and goals, we can do the strategy, which is the what question, and then we can budget for the strategy as well as for our operations and create a strategic operating plan, which is a how and how much question. And finally, down to programs, projects, and services, which is the tactical how. So operating the business is, are we doing things right? So we want to get first things first, and that would be the strategy side of this. So to put the context for performance measurement, we can put our stethoscope for measures anywhere where we need to along this continuum from high altitude vision and mission down to low altitude projects, programs, and services. And the key to doing that is to have a framework that allows you to put that performance measurement stethoscope and get meaningful information. Let's talk for a minute about the differences with performance measurement in government and business and industry. We generally divide the sector into two: government and nonprofit. We call that mission-driven organizations, and business and industry, typically called private sector organizations. So there's some significant differences when we talk government and not-for-profit versus business and industry. For one thing, the mission-driven organizations are just that. Their reason for business, reason for being, is derived from regulations or laws or executive orders. They deal with security and social, environmental, or other purposes for the good of citizens. When we get to the business side of the ledger, it's mostly around achieving the vision. So businesses tend to be vision-driven, and government and not-for-profit tend to be mission-driven. When we get to the value proposition and we look at what are the end outcomes that we would like to achieve, the value proposition for government and not-for-profit leads to mission effectiveness, citizen satisfaction, wise use of money, of taxpayer resources, state resources. When we're on the business side, it's really the financial rewards for the owner. It's having satisfied employees, driving satisfaction in customer services. When we get to strategy, again, the strategy for government and not-for-profit is tied closer to mission than it is to vision. In the case of business, it's usually tied closer to vision. There's exceptions, when we get to quasi-government organizations or state-owned enterprises. You have to customize how you approach it, because there's the value proposition, for example, serves both financial as well as stakeholder satisfaction. So there's variations on a theme, but in general, this chart holds true. When we get to measurement on the government and not-for-profit side, we're looking at social impact on people, impact on the environment, and primarily the effectiveness of the programs and the services that we are offering our stakeholders, whether they're citizens or whether they're members of an association, and so on. So it's very much stakeholder focused on the end outcome for the measurement. On the case of business and industry, profitability, shareholder value, growing the business, and so on. So these differences need to be considered when you're building your management system and your measurement system. So let's talk for a minute about KPI definitions and some guiding principles. Again, words mean different things to different people in our business, in our profession. So I'm going to use a simple definition for KPI, that they're the critical indicators of progress towards some desirable outcome. How do we know good when we see it? What do we mean by a good KPI? We have some objective evidence of progress is one of the components of that. The KPI measures what is intended to be measured to help better inform the decisions that we're making. So this is regardless of where you are in the organization. The point is that we want to get performance information to anybody who needs it in the organization. So we're not just talking about executive information systems for senior level executives, for example. When we talk about performance measurement and KPIs, the goal is to make sure that folks have performance information to make better choices, whether they're working on the shop floor or at their desk or in the executive suite. Another component of good is that it offers a comparison, so we can gauge the degree of performance changes over time. We can trend the data and see whether we're getting better or getting worse. We can track the different components that are important to operation of an enterprise or an organization, whether it's efficiency or effectiveness, quality, timeliness, safety, and so on through the list. There's a lot of different dimensions to performance measurement that we can measure. And finally, we want KPIs that are valid and verifiable, and a balance between leading and lagging indicators, so we can start doing some predictive analysis of what drives what. What are the leading measures that are important to developing the lagging outcomes that we want from our business or from our organization. All right, so let's get started here. Some topics: measurement myths and mistakes. What I'm sharing with you here is Joe and I have worked in about 60 or 70 countries around the world over the course of our long careers, and so we've compiled sort of the short list of things that we have observed. One of the most common ones is that folks think that performance measurement is easy. We just got to sit around a table and talk about it for a while, and then we'll come up with a measure. And somebody at the table usually says, wait a minute, I've got a book on measures. Let's just look in the book. The book is helpful to help frame a conversation, but if you are going to rely on a book of measures, and now we have books with thousands of measures, you're really missing the whole point of performance measurement, which is to work backwards from what you're trying to accomplish and then figure out what the measures of success are to get to where you want to go. So you won't find that in a book of measures. Another mistake that we've seen is that folks say, just give me the SMART measures. SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-related. There's a few other definitions of SMART, and I put those in the parentheses there for the different letters. So, for example, a SMART example is we want to decrease the average time to resolve customer complaints to 3 minutes by the end of the third quarter, 2016. The problem with SMART is that people think it is a framework, and really it's a filter. It's more of a filter, because you can end up with SMART objectives, but it doesn't mean that they're the best measures to use. I think SMART is one of those necessary but not sufficient kind of a tests where we want them to be smart, but we have to go through another process before we apply the SMART filter to make sure that they're the measures that we want to use. One of the things Joe and I have observed over the years that there's an absolute rush to judgment to get to performance measures. It's almost like when you get around the table in a facilitation workshop, and you can just sense that people are in a hurry. Just give me the measures. I'm in a hurry. Here's some measures that my friend is using in another company or another organization. Can't we just use those? It's almost like measures are the end rather than a means to an end. So we try and discourage this rush to judgment to get to the measures. There's a number of important questions we have to ask first before we get to the measurement question. Another myth is that this isn't hard. It is hard work to get a good set of performance measures, and it takes time. It isn't something you do in a half-a-day workshop with 20 people in the room. Here's a quote that we heard once. I have an easy way to do this. We'll just write our vision or mission statement, set some goals, select the programs and projects for each of the goal buckets, and we'll just pick some measures. Sounds deceptively easy, doesn't it? But for those of you who have been through a process of strategic planning and building a management system, setting up a measurement system, you know that it's not quite that simple. There's also another rush to judgment. We see a rush to judgment to buy a piece of software. Like somehow if I buy software, that's going to include the thinking that goes behind measuring the right stuff. There's probably over 100 software packages, I know it was well over 110 a few years ago, that had balanced scorecard or performance measurement or performance measures, KPIs, somewhere on the box. And the implication was, buy the software and you're off and running. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We actually advise folks not to buy the software until you have thought through what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to measure what you're trying to accomplish. And then the software makes it easy to move information around the organization, but it is not a substitute for the critical thinking that you need to do to get to the right KPIs or measures. Okay, so how do we get off to a good start? We've talked a little bit about myths and some things that we can do wrong. How can we get off to a good start? I think there are 3 questions that set the stage. And Joe, I think you're going to pick up at this point, so I'll let Joe carry on. Good morning, Joe. Okay.
Thank you. Morning, Howard. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just switch to my screen here, and I'll get caught up. And let's start with these framing questions. All right, we're going to start with the end in mind. And also at this point, I like to always tell my students in the class or clients that, you know, you've been through the mechanics, you've got your strategy built, you built the elements that Howard talked about earlier on one of the earlier slides. You have your fundamental strategy, you have the framework for your strategy set. Now we've got to take a look at how do we get to the right measures, and it's the end in mind that we're taking a look at. So at this point on the strategic objectives, you need to take a look and say, what are we trying to accomplish with that objective? And inside of each of those objectives that understand, for those that have been through balanced scorecard processes, you have a description for each objective, and you also have an intended result. And that intended result for each of those strategic objectives is what you're trying to accomplish. How is it that you're going to measure that accomplishment? How will you know success when you see it? Well, obviously, one of the things that we want to get as we look at the performance measure output and the accomplishment is we want to see a uptick in some meter, some measurement, some bar chart, some gauge, some trend line that says, looking back at past trends, past data points, and comparing that to our current collection of information from the performance measure. We want to see, did we make some difference in that particular indicator? And the third end in mind is, what KPIs are meaningful for what I'm trying to accomplish for measuring progress toward goals. The real message behind this bullet is that when you go through a process of trying to create your KPIs, you're probably going to create several. You'll have a pretty good list to pick from. And one of the things that you have to step back in this build process for starting with the end in mind is to say, which of this list that we've come together and had consensus on that we think will be appropriate for the KPI, in that which one has the strongest capability of giving us the results so that we will know success when we see it and we will show accomplishment. Not every KPI is going to be as strong as the one next to it or on your list or wherever you've got them posted on your wall, but you have to come to consensus as to which one is going to be the most meaningful that you want to put into play. So you need a framework to answer these questions and create meaningful KPIs. So let's go through our proposed framework that we found is highly successful in getting clients to selection of a list of the most effective and highest effective KPIs that they can possibly put together. The first is the KPI development side of the process, and I mentioned already, describe the intended results. The intended results off of the description of a strategic objective is very specific. It's very singular in nature. We don't want intended results to say efficiency and productivity have increased. That's two different things, so we have to split those out. You'll have a series of measures that will hit productivity and a series of measures that might hit efficiency. So intended results comes off of each objective. You need to understand if there's alternative measures that can be used to resolve that intended result positively. Now, what do I mean by an alternative measures? In a nice, real, simple world, we'd like to be able to directly measure the intended results of each strategic objective. And in some cases, a lot of objectives from a strategy map for an organization can be directly measured, but oftentimes, especially in the internal process level, there are objectives that must have correlated or contributing measurements from other processes, from other parts of the organization that must be used as an alternative measure for that particular intended result, KPI. You have to select the right measure. You know, you look at enough research on building strategy, and it's like, you know, there's three basic tenets. You have to build a strategy, you have to build the performance measures, and then you have to build the performance management system. Inside of building the performance measures, you have to select the right metrics. Well, that's the steps 3 is going through and looking at what are the best metrics for a particular KPI that you may have selected or designed. You have to design composite indices or indicators if needed. Composite indices are familiar to all of us everywhere in the world. Our economic systems in our respective countries process the most well-known composite indice, which is the consumer price index. Every country has a consumer price index, so its population knows exactly what it costs to maintain any type of lifestyle. And these composite indicators are a nice way of putting together some type of a measurement KPI that allows a lot of different variables to be used to come up with that indicator. And just for instance, things like employee satisfaction. There are a lot of different variables that are contained in coming up with an indicator for employee satisfaction. Same concept with customer satisfaction. Typically, you look at enough literature, anything that has a satisfaction element to it is going to be resolved with a metric and measurement that is a composite indicator. Setting the targets and thresholds. Now, when you get started with a KPI, the first order of business, when you get concurrence, that you know you've got the right measurement, you're going to use the right metric, you need to sit back with your team and say, okay, what is the target and what is the threshold? Well, targets cannot be arbitrary. I mean, that makes no purpose. All performance integrated strategic planning and performance management system to put an arbitrary target in there. It must be based on something. Typically, you're going to base your target on your baseline data from your organization. In the absence of baseline data, you're going to do some research that goes out and looks at similar industries, similar functions, similar department operations that have been captured in some type of document. Typically, you've got all kinds of services that offer this as a professional service to take a look at compare your organization to another organization. In absence of that, you're going to have to sit back, and this kind of goes back to one of Howard's earlier slides, that this is not the easy part. You're going to have to go back with your team and say, well, we don't have a baseline, we can't get a good industry report, so we have to set the target to our best professional experience knowledge around what this has been for our organization. But that has caveats with it, such that, and the main one is, you're going to watch the performance KPI much more frequently than you are maybe the other KPIs that are looked at monthly or quarterly. So that's one caveat with putting out a best guess, so to speak, as to what the target should be. The thresholds, again, can be set to a number of things. What has the past experience been? Do we want to raise the threshold to when it turns green, when it turns to yellow, when it turns to red? Or do we want to set some behavioral change, depending on what level in the organization it is? We want to uptick some customer service skills or something like that. So thresholds, it starts with the targets, and then the thresholds get set for what's being indicated. Next is you have to define and document the performance measures. One of the things that you'll find, and I'm sure those of you that have done strategic plans and implementation systems, is the documentation process oftentimes doesn't get the attention that it needs because it's your knowledge stream of what was built and how it was built and why it was built. And in this case, the definition of the performance measures and documentation is critical to the entry into a performance management system. And it's really a generational database because these performance measures will change over time. And you got to be able to go back and say, how did they come up with this KPI a year ago or 2 years ago? What was their genesis for this? What was the driver for this? And that should all be captured in these performance measure documentations. Next, there's another side to this performance management and analysis process, which is the analysis side. So you have to select the most appropriate automation tool. Howard already mentioned there's well over 100. I mean, is there anything wrong with using Excel? No, because if that's what your organization is standardized on, that's easily used and known to everyone probably in the audience today. Do you want to move to something bigger? You know, there's any number of tools out there that are performance management systems. And then you have to take into account, you know, if you're a fully blown ERP data warehouse operation, you probably have a lot of tools inside of that already that can be used. It just takes research on your part to find out what's the most appropriate. You have to collect and monitor it. Now, it's interesting. A lot of students I've talked to and about their organizations and a lot of clients after we work with them, they do a lot of good jobs of going steps 1 through 6 and getting 7 started, and they don't really take the collect and monitor to its fullest extreme. And in our world, collecting and monitoring is getting to that state of where this can be automatically collected on a regular basis based on the description and the design of the performance measure and its metrics. So if you're going to hit a certain database every month on this date, this time, it just pulls the data in and fills and loads your performance management reporting system. The machine does not make the decisions and does not substitute itself for the human aspect of this process. You need to sit back as objective owners, as objective owner teams, as the executive C-suite, and spend time looking at the results from the collection and monitor step 8 and analyze it and draw conclusions. This affects in our process, it's called step 9, which is evaluation. We recommend that as an executive team or as a strategy management office or as a PMO office, you're going to be looking at this data on at least a quarterly basis. We actually get more aggressive at an organization that's very dynamic and say you might be wanting to look at this on a monthly basis. And that stands to reason. I know that some students and clients say, wow, you want me to look at this stuff like every week or every month? And it's like, well, in the presumption that you have step 7 completed, technically you should be able to be looking at this every minute of the day if you wanted to. I mean, that's what automation brings to the table. It's real-time data. So let's sit back and analyze and draw conclusions about this. And last but not least is you have to sit down as that executive C-suite team in those quarterly, monthly, quarterly, yearly meetings that you have, and you have to improve performance. That's the last step of this analysis. You're going to use the data to do something to improve how the organization operates. Let's go down to the next step, which is track and measure strategy execution and types of KPIs. First of all, let's take a look at strategy execution. This is on everyone's mind. I freely tell students and clients, you can do a very good job of building your entire strategy. You can get all the components absolutely correct. You can get the performance measures designed, the right metrics. And unfortunately, one of the things that they don't do well, and this is not any one organization, this is a lot of organizations, They don't continue the communications aspect of the strategy. There's a launch, they launch the strategy, they get the entire organization on board, they've done a good job of doing the buy-in, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we did our job, we got our product, we got our strategy, then we stop communicating about it. And we relegate that communication to maybe the annual report. But there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. You need to take a look at this process of building a strategy in this communications business. It's kind of like you're building an engine in a car. You know, the car is the organization, and the engine is what's driving it. The strategy planning system and performance management system is driving the car. The other thing that you have to be careful about, and it comes from this PMI Pulse in 2014, the other fault line, as I call it, in strategy execution, the first is you stop communicating about it. Second is you don't do well on your project management execution. And this one, I freely poll students and clients when I'm working with them, how well does your organization do project execution? And that is further complicated by organizations that have project programs underway, because we know that underneath those programs are any number of projects that have to be executed. So consequently, continual communications of a strategic nature and also very good project execution are important to getting things done. And as that quote there says, keeping the trains running on time. You have to be honest with yourself on this project management execution, because if you're not, you're undermining your strategy, a serious amount of issues that you'll create for yourself. Let's look at the different types of KPIs needed to measure strategy execution. Well, I want you to start thinking of this series of rectangles here as cylinders in an engine. And we all drive cars, and this is the start of the powertrain, so to speak. It starts with these cylinders in your engine, and first cylinder is strategic measures. The strategic measures are those that we talked about earlier, were the strategic objectives and the KPIs that are associated strictly with those strategic objectives. Those are the ones that are going to make a difference long term if the organization is making progress. It goes straight right back to, are we measuring the right things, and are we seeing the performance outcome that we're looking for the organization? Second is the operational measures. Now we have the product, program, and services. You know, we have to keep the lights on, keep the trains running every year, so there's an operational side of things that need to be done. But the operational side feeds the strategic objective side. It's a diagram that we'll see in a minute about the operational measures and the strategic measures, the outcomes. What outcomes are we looking for? The third cylinder is that project measures. You know, we know, those of us in the project management world, you know that this is all about schedule, scope, and resource. I mean, are we making those three sides of that triangle clicking exactly how we laid it out? Any one of those becomes an issue, then the project measures are off the rails or off track. And employee measures. We know that at the lowest level of the organization, we can have the greatest strategy in the world for an organization, but if at the lowest level the employees are not executing their individual goals or objectives that have been set by their department manager, then we are undermining the execution of the overall organizational strategy. And those employee measures are things like behavioral changes, skill changes, tasks on projects related to a various department that they may be working for. And the last cylinder is risk measures. What are the risks associated with the overall strategy and any part of the strategy as it's aligned or cascaded throughout the organization? Identifying those risks are extremely important, because it will start to lend itself in various scenario plans about what the risk is to the overall strategy should any of those risks be rated or become reality based on the risk analysis. Now, I want you to take a look at this graphic, and you can see the cylinders are listed there. The strategic measures or cylinders moved off to the left a little bit, but look at that center graphic. That's the engine. And that engine of operational measures, project measures, employee measures, and risk measures is creating some kind of power in that down arrow that's going to create some performance and data analysis and internal reporting. And in the car scenario, that purple arrow at the bottom running left to right is nothing more than your dashboard on your car or your automobile. Those are the things that you start to see. Those strategic measures on the left are what gets things started. And what is it in terms of an engine? You got to have the right air mixture, you got to have the right fuel mixture, you got to have the right power, you got to have the right components in the engine, and those things relate itself to the perspectives of a balanced scorecard. Organizational capacity, you have to have the right people with the right skills at the right time, with the right tools and the right technology and infrastructure in your organization in order to make things happen. And where do things happen? In that internal process perspective. They take advantage of everything at the organizational capacity and put it into play. And into play is products, services, communications, anything that relates itself to either a customer and a stakeholder satisfaction or a financial outcome, depending on if you're a government, nonprofit, or a for-profit organization. Customer, it's all about customer satisfaction and customer experience and stakeholder experience. And in the case of governments, it's all about contributing to the quality of life, achieving your mission at the end of the day based on your strategy. And financial is very similar regardless of what type of organization it is. It basically makes a statement that you know how to run your business, and your business might be government, it might be a nonprofit, or it will be a for-profit organization. If we look at those cylinders in the center, it's efficiency, output, quality, timeliness, schedule, resource, risk, and scope for project, human behavior, human performance, ratcheting that up, hazard, economic, security, operational, and strategic. I have one client that deals in petroleum products, storage of petroleum products, transportation of petroleum products, and their risk plan obviously focuses a lot around what the risks are in that particular product and product delivery. So those risk measures will vary based on organizations. And at the end, that car, when you're pressing on that accelerator and you're looking at that tachometer and you're looking at the miles per hour, you want to see something reported out on your dashboard that says we're doing the right things and we've done the right things in terms of setting up our engine and our various components to get the engine started. So those are the various things like how is your objectives performing, how are your KPIs performing, how are your projects performing, and that's what the reporting aspect is off to the right. Let's talk next about some tools and a little bit about tools and Toolkit and how can you get to these KPIs in an orderly and structured fashion so that it's not just a free-for-all in trying to define what these KPIs and their metrics are. First thing is you got to have objectives and strategy map. We work with a client that had done a great job at identifying themes, had done a great job identifying programs related to a bunch of projects, had any number of projects connected to those programs. And unfortunately, they got to a board of directors meeting and the board chairman said, Mr. President, CEO, how do we know that these projects and programs are strategic? And unfortunately, there was silence. And then there was an explanation, but what really was the answer was that they didn't have any strategic objectives identified to attach those programs and projects to. So they had us in to identify what those objectives were and then create the connection point or connecting of the dots between their themes or drivers, their objectives, and their programs, and it was very logical then. So they could point at any project and say, yes, that is attached to these objectives. Oh, by the way, they found some projects and programs, definitely some projects that didn't attach to any objectives in the end. And that's created a conversation about why are we doing this project, because I can't see any strategic nature in it. So one of the things you have to have is those strategic objectives and a strategy map to show the logic. You have to have some kind of process or mechanism to identify potential key performance indicators. We're going to talk about three here in just a second, very briefly. The logic model, which very deliberately exhibits operational measures from strategic measures. Cause and effect relationships, another term for the Ishikawa or fishbone diagram, and the process flow diagram. These get you to that point of looking for those alternative measures such that you can, through the process analysis, that you can use as a potential KPIs. First of all, let's level set on objectives. We're not talking about high altitude statements, things that are too high, mission and vision type language, and we're not talking about projects and programs on the ground level. Typically those things that have start date and end date and a budget associated with them, and you can see the reasons there. They're too low and they're too narrowly defined, and the upper ones at the 30,000 foot level are too high, too vague, and they're not actionable. Yeah, vision statements, very inspiring, but you can measure maybe some component of it, which we highly recommend you put in your vision statement. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of loose language in there, like provider of choice, high performance, world class, which talk to 10 different people and you'll get 10 different definitions of that. Objectives are very mid-altitude. They're very continuous improvement in their nature because that's what the organization has to see. And they take on a very contained structure based on that description and that intended result over time. So they're very action-oriented all the time throughout the execution of the strategy. So one of the key things when I work with students in my class and the clients is the strategic management team, the department heads, if there's cascading or alignment get done, have got to be able to tell the story of what the strategy is for their organization or department. And you have to show the objectives in a cause and effect linked process. That's the only way to maneuver or create this roadmap of the storytelling for your strategy. I will tell you categorically, many people, both clients and also students based on the case studies in the classroom, are very comfortable starting from that organizational capacity and moving up throughout the four perspectives. And it's very natural. I mean, in this case, if we want to improve knowledge, skills, and ability for the organization or department, one of the natural outcomes is we should see an increase in process efficiency. Same thing if we improve the knowledge and tools or tools and technology, should have an impact on process efficiency improvement. So the leading question is then if then, but there is a comparative number of, especially C-suite, and that kind of goes with the territory of a C-suite, to talk about what you've accomplished in your strategy, so that they like to come from the top perspective downward, especially in for-profit organizations, and reverse those two perspectives if you happen to be a government or a nonprofit, and you can talk about your mission accomplishment then to your customer and stakeholder communities. The leading question starts at how did you do that? How did I lower costs? Well, I increased efficiency. How did you increase the efficiency? You improved the knowledge and skills, etc. It's all what you're comfortable with. The basic message here is you have to, as an executive or a manager or a team leader, get very comfortable in telling the story of your strategy and through this graphic. Let's talk about another tools to get to meaningful measures. I mentioned them before. It's the logic model. Very good about very good dissection of operational and then outcome measures that are strategic. Cause and effect, you always start with the end in mind, which is the effect side here, and the process flow, which is that ellipsis that's on the farthest right there. So there's familiar tools, especially those in Lean Six Sigma and any BPM process management, business process management. These process flows are second nature to groups from there. Let's talk about logic model for a second. This is a personal one that I like to use with a lot of students in class and clients. because it removes, first of all, that nature that we have as workers or individuals or executives that have been assigned a task or a series of tasks, to put operational measures in as strategic measures. Why? Because that's what we're doing every day. We're working on certain tasks. We're working on certain elements that we have to get done. And to us, in the cubicle or at our desk, this is strategic to us because it's us, the individual. Well, now you have to raise your line of sight to the organization. What is it that makes a difference to the organization? And that's the strategic impact measures off to the right. So one of the things that we look for when we work with clients is, and this happens, it may sound far-fetched, but they want to put strategic measures in, like the number of meetings held or the number of reports written. That is so operational in nature that after you look at the logic model, it's like, oh, that definitely is in the operational side. It may contribute to an end outcome or an intermediate outcome, but the fact of the matter is getting to the strategic impact measurements is extremely important. And then, of course, attached to either the operation or the strategic impact measurements is the project measures, the schedule, resources, scope, and risk that have to be measured as well. No great intelligence deciphering here. As you move from left to right on the spectrum, your strategic business intelligence increases from operational to strategic impact. If we take a look at an example, so we have improved web presence. Startup companies, web-based businesses, business-to-business commerce that's strictly working in a non-brick-and-mortar world. They live and die by their web presence. I mean, they have teams of individuals that work on this. Their intended result here was our target customer demographic can find our organization on the web. Well, if we take a look at deciphering or decomposing that intended results down to a set of operational and strategic measures, let's start with the end in mind. And the end is, based on that intended result, web sales, brand awareness, and thought leadership should be on the rise, because that's what we said. They can find us, and if they find us as an organization on the web, we should be able to see a change in sales, brand awareness, thought leadership, and we can work backward. So what do we need to do to get that end outcome triggered or started? Well, if we go back to the left end of the spectrum, on the input side, you have to do web design, you have the full-time equivalent hours of staff, web design, outsourcing dollars. That list can be very long. You have to put those inputs into play. So what do we have to do? Web design efficiency, number of pages developed per day, any other thing that relates to web-based design. Having come from the software world, what was the lines of code per software developer? That was a pretty standard measurement back in the day when I was doing software development. Output, new pages posted, design improvements completed, that output, but still notice we're only in the operational world. We've done a lot of things. We've ground up a lot of resource time, a lot of resource finances, but still to make a strategic impact, we have to cross that line and say, well, what's the first thing we can measure is that, yeah, we saw increased web traffic, number of visits, number of referrals, web search engine ranking, but that's still not the end outcome for that intended result. The intended result is we saw sales increased, brand awareness increased, and thought leadership was recognized as increasing. So you can kind of get the flow as to how that's looking at. And then along the way, as you saw on the previous slide, we said there's project measures associated with this. Well, one of the projects is the design team came up and said we need a new portal, so we have to make it simple to scope to maneuver the portal. We can complete no more than 20 pages by a certain date. We have resources and budget, most likely in turn including the manpower. And what the risk is risk, lost sales, competition aggressively selling no. Those of you that work in an online environment or a web-based environment, this is the battleground with your competition. who gets the pages, who gets the eyeballs, who gets the counts, how long do they stay on your page, and how much do they stay, and how much do they maneuver through lower pages in the website. This is the whole competitive landscape for any business that's working in a web-based world. Here's a cause and effect model on something like improved customer satisfaction, and we're going to use the process flow to do this. And I said you start with the end in mind, which is the improved customer sat. And you can see the results arrow there. The key thing is we want improve customer experience. It drives certain behaviors: recommendations, loyalty, satisfaction. We all know in the business world, and you may know it from the government side for services, and your mission is that it's much easier to retain a happy customer or stakeholder than it is to go out and try to generate new ones. And so things like satisfaction, loyalty, and those that recommend our services or products is much more significant to the organization from a strategic standpoint. And so to do that, there might be percent new customers from recommendations. This is typically your net promoter score if you're in the business world these days, and percent repeat customers and those that are satisfied. And working backward, you can say, okay, what does it take to get results? Well, you got to deliver, and you can, through the delivery process, on-time delivery, correct order, and you can see the potential measures there. Next thing is we have to have the customer interaction to generate this whole process to get to the results. So you have to collect information, accurate information, customer experience. Next thing is you have to get production ramped up so that you've got the products and services available when you need them. I'm going through this process right now on a new laptop that I just ordered, and I knew based on the configuration, they told me 2 weeks, and I've been watching the monitoring of the build, which they give me insights to, so that I can see that they're going to deliver on that promise to get me that laptop because of the massive configuration that I put into it in 2 weeks, and I can actually track that online as I go through and I wait for my product. And the resourcing, money, workforce, and infrastructure, and then you've got the cost of production and other units of production that you might look at as well. There's 6 best charts for tracking performance. You got to report this stuff out. There's no question about that. And to get this reported out, you got to use the right graphic. And students who come to our chart, our course, and I use with clients, we've got some recommended beyond the 6 best, but it all depends on what you're trying to relay in terms of the visual message that you're trying to bring. So if we're comparing measures across categories, bar charts, look for dominant causes, high to low, a dot chart to compare measures based on ratings, line chart, scatter plot, and an XMR chart, which is very interesting to look at because this is one that I recommend to students and I use with clients because it removes the angst, I call it, from watching a particular performance KPI output. As an owner of an objective, I may be tracking what my KPIs are doing for my objective, and I keep seeing little rises. I call them little waves of movement of the data, and the real thing is, should I be concerned or not? And so it comes down to the trending. It comes down to how long did it stay above my target or my mean. And if I start to see 2 or 3, maybe 4 data points in either direction, now I'm going beyond noise and I'm going to, maybe this is a signal and a change. And an XMR chart is excellent for that type of, and it removes, as I call it, the stress of having to spend time looking at what's happening. Visualization is extremely important, and one of the things that's important about most systems that report out data, and this is from a performance management system, is the ability of drilling down into your organization and pulling up KPIs and performance and project information and rolling it up into some what I call super KPIs that executive suites may want to put as a target for a period of time. And it allows you to do analysis inside the organization at all levels. And once again, the the prerequisite here is that you've got a performance management system that can do that. And then also you can see that you have immediate visualization as to where's the problem. Well, lower left here, customer complaints is off the charts, and we've got some indicators in the yellows that says next reporting period we may be on the high side of red because of the down arrow. So you have a certain number of things that you can get some quick fixes on here. And in this particular case, you can see dashboards, maps, reports, and it's browser-based. It's on your smartphones or on your tablet, wherever it needs to be. Let's take a look at the results. Better decisions informed by performance information. Now this puts it in the structure of our engine. Now this is on the strategic side, where we've got the various components in place for that engine, which is the perspectives. You saw that in the earlier graphic. So we've got the organizational capacity, perspective, internal processes, financial and client stakeholders. It's very interesting to look at this connection point. It's not just these four. There was a recent article out in one of the recent editions of MIT Sloan that they did some research to look at, well, how many times did the KPI productivity get hit or attached or touched in the entire process across these four perspectives. And it was a very interesting article because they create their own maps of the KPIs. And the resolution of the research was that the more frequent a KPI is looked, the more critical it is to the overall strategy. You might say, okay, no great shakes there in that analysis, but the fact of the matter is the process which they used to go through and map which KPIs had the most activity and could be the most critical to the organization are now easily identified, as opposed to being just some set of data on a report or on an Excel spreadsheet, so you know where the critical ones are. In this case, we said in the core organizational capacity, training hours per employee. Sounds reasonable. Next thing is productivity should increase. If I got them into the right training, now this isn't training hours per employee of anything that they may want to take of a personal nature or business nature. This presumes that it's a business nature, and their training's been improved, so maybe their training is going to have an impact on productivity, which if that productivity improves, the average program cost per client served should increase. I've got more things coming out the back end of someone's work or some team's work or some department's work that's raising the productivity and having a direct impact on the financial. And in this case, it's probably a government or nonprofit organization, more clients are successfully served. In working with an assessor's office of a county government, this was one of the major performance indicators, was getting more clients successfully served. And after 2 years of implementation, they've started to see that number uptick quite significantly. So why is this valuable? Well, you have to understand those relationships with the drivers. And one of the things you can do, anybody that needs a reference to that Sloan Management Review article, you can send a note to Informa, and we'll get that link to accessing that article. How about aligning strategy and operations? First order of business, Howard talked about the language aspect. When you cascade strategy or you align strategy, you're only aligning the strategic objectives from the organization down to the departments or support units. They create their own set of strategic objectives, and those objectives get cascaded or aligned down to the teams and individuals. So it all starts with the strategic objectives. That's why in any strategy building or balanced scorecard development system, that whole mechanics of putting together that strategy plan based on strategic objectives is extremely important. But it also says you can start cascading once the objectives have concurrence and been accepted as valid for the organization. So we see the corporate here, so you have customer satisfaction. We have the operating divisions. They're going to work at creating their customer retention. We have a division director who's going to be working on on-time delivery. You got a manager who's working on quality, and you've got a team who's going to work on supply availability, schedule adherence. So that's a customer example. How about a financial example going across an organization? Well, big three for private organizations or for-profit: reduce costs, increase revenue, increase profitability. For a government, it's probably going to be cost containment as well as improving quality of life as the ultimate end outcome for a mission-driven organization. You still have to create some kind of operating margin, regardless if you're for-profit or non-profit. You have to watch your variable costs for that cost containment if you're government or non-profit. You have to watch your variable costs and overhead at the manager level. So we're starting to starting to interweave this tightness and connecting the dots between strategy and operations. And then the teams have to watch their scrap rate if it's a manufacturing, a labor per unit on various projects, or basically the project's cost out into the field. So you can start to see from these two examples how the strategic objectives and the operational objectives for a yearly plan start to get very tightly woven to each other. Here's a little, I talked about targets and thresholds before. It's the level of performance for reporting a period in question. Thresholds, the upper and lower limits of a target value. That's why setting the targets is extremely important, and getting that exact point where you start to display green for good performance, yellow. And I said before, it's not arbitrary on the targets. Baseline, best practices, required level of performance. Other logical comparative, the designers sitting around, usually the strategic management team, and coming to concurrence as to what the various targets should be on the KPIs if you don't have any of the first three bullets listed there. And then, of course, as a part of the evaluation process, looking at these periodically, you just don't start the car and let it idle and run without watching the rest of the indicators that are coming out and saying we have to make some adjustments here, because guess what? That one that we said we used the other logical comparative, the needle's not moving, so something must be wrong. So you have to, as an objective owner and team, take a look at those and see where some change has to be done. Let's take one more look at how this looks when you cascade or align throughout the organization. It all starts with the vision and mission. If your vision, if you're for-profit, if it's mission because your mission results or mission accomplishment for governments or nonprofit is critical. And remember, all of the objectives are built off of creating value to resolve that vision positively. If you're a nonprofit, if you're government or not, or a nonprofit, it's resolving your mission. So value creation, going from the bottom part of a strategic plan that's based on a balanced scorecard, is all about value creation all the way up through the various perspectives. So in this case, we had an objective called improve customer satisfaction. They said the measure was % of customers satisfied, and the initiative is a web portal so that they become more satisfied. When we cascade that objective, improve customer satisfaction, down to a department, we have, in this case, a department that said, yeah, we're in a position to support that objective strongly. Well, the first prerequisite for making that statement is, does the department have a direct influence over customers? So in this case, this department did improve information on available services. And in their case, they said we're going to make service availability awareness survey score and a communications program announcing a new information hotline. You know, this could have been things like a call center. This could have been something like a product line inside of an organization. But where sometimes everyone feels like, oh, we have to, every department has to support every Tier 1 objective. That is fundamentally flawed, because some of those departments do not have direct influence over some of those Tier 1 strategic objectives. So they have to have a good discussions about what type of level of influence they actually have. And last but not least, down to the teams and individuals from that departmental objective, well, we have a personal objective now, personal goal, which is to improve web and print content delivery, accomplishment measurement, a behavior measurement, and now a personal development plan. Remember, at the team and individual level, These are the ground forces that are going to put into action that strategy. Was built all the way up on Tier 1 because they're working for the Tier 2 department, but those Tier 2 department objectives were cascaded or aligned off the Tier 1 organizational strategy. So now you're asking the teams and individuals to execute on that strategy. So you have to have the different things in place for those teams and individuals. So consequently, it's behavior, accomplishment, and personal development. And the one also that needs to be taken into account, and I would be remiss if I exited out of this slide without saying, is you have to watch the rewards and recognition programs. I don't care if you're government or nonprofit, and I know that's very hard to do in those structures, but there's a way to do that if you think creatively about it. For-profits have a lot more leeway as to what they can do. And remember my last statement on rewards and recognition, it's not always money. So please be creative about that because at that level, people want to know what's in it for me. And just doing the behavioral things, doing the accomplishment things, and the personal development, you have to have recognition built into that process as well. Howard, I think I'm all done on my section. If you want to pick up with more examples.
All right, let me change presenters here and see if we can't get back. Can you?
Yep, you're there.
All right, very good. A few more examples, and then we'll open it up for questions. I noticed one of the early questions was, can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, we're going to make this available both on the Informa website for the upcoming conference in December in Saudi Arabia, and also on the Balanced Scorecard Institute website. So we should have this up later today. One other comment on what you have just seen. What we have found is that you can use the historic tools of our profession in a new and unique way, and that's really what you saw, is a combination of tools and some modification to tools that have been around for a long time. The logic model, cause-effect model, and so on. What we're really trying to get across in this presentation is that developing meaningful performance measures is a critical thinking process. And to do that, you have a number of tools that are available that you can use. The key is, how do you connect the dots between the outcomes of the different tools that are available into something that's meaningful and practical for people. We could make this a lot more academic, we could make this a lot more theoretical, but at the end of the day, the reality is you need a practical way of getting to the best measures that you can in a limited amount of time and given the limited amount of resources that you're willing to put against this issue. And there's no substitute for thinking critically from the end backwards. That's a significant change for most folks, where most of us are comfortable, as Joe said, operating in the sandbox. Give me a project, give me some resources, tell me when it's due, and let me get my job done. This process says, do it differently. Start with what you're trying to accomplish and work backwards rather than starting with your budget and working forwards. I can share with you, based on doing this for 30 years, that there is a significant change in the conversation in the room when you work from the end backwards rather than from the from inputs forward. And what happens is that organizations ask much harder questions of themselves. They ask deeper questions, the discussions are deeper. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, think about the suggestion to, with the end in mind, and work backwards, rather than the easier way, which is to just talk about the stuff that we're currently doing and try and make sense out of it. Okay, I'm going to go back to 1854 in London, the Soho district. There was a cholera epidemic and people were dying at an alarming rate. The prevailing thought was that airborne pathogens were causing cholera. And there was an outlier, Dr. John Snow, who said, no, I don't think so. I think it's the water supply. The Thames is the problem, delivered locally to the Soho district. So this is an example of the practical use of performance data. So what he did was create a map and put dots on it for cholera deaths. And he observed that in certain parts of the city, specifically Broad Street, which is shown in the red oval, there is a large number of cholera deaths near the intersection of Broad Street and where that word pump is located. He also noted that you go a block away and that there were no deaths associated around the brewery. And his observation was maybe it's the water, not the air. And so to do a test, he convinced the city council to remove the pump handle on the Broad Street pumping station, and within a matter of days, cholera deaths started going down. So an example of using performance data to make a difference. Another practical example, this was a public school system outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And the observation was that the kids who were most at risk had much lower graduation rates than kids in better school systems. And so they looked at a lot of data and asked themselves some key questions. The first one was, what aspect of performance most accurately predicted graduation? You remember Joe's example of the organization with 4 perspectives, where we're trying to figure out what drives the results that we want. So when we use this with a class, we usually pause and get a lot of different opinions on what is the course that most accurately predicts graduation. Well, the data show that if you can pass Algebra 1, you have a much higher chance of graduating from high school than if you don't pass Algebra 1. So then the next question is, okay, what's the precursor or a predictor of passing Algebra 1? Most folks would answer math. Well, it turns out that success at 8th grade creative writing was the best predictor. The county won something called the Broad Prize for Student Achievement and Improvement when they actually changed the curriculum in the school system to put more emphasis on algebra and creative writing, and saw the rates change and improve for at-risk kids. So very powerful use of performance data to make a difference in people's lives. That's what we're looking for. We'll close with a few slides here. Strategy execution is about making strategy everyone's job. That's really one of the key messages from what we have learned over the years. What happens when strategy isn't everybody's job? This is not a Photoshop. This is a real picture of a real road in one of our clients' countries. And the quote from the person who was on the highway crew was, "This is not in my job description. I draw lines. I don't remove trees." That's what happened when strategy is not everybody's job. We wrote a lot of what you've seen in this presentation in our book called The Institute Way, which is available on our website and on Amazon. And so if you want to learn more about it, please feel free to pick that up. We're going to be at the conference coming up December 4th through 7th in Riyadh, and you can go to strategyexecutionsaudi.com to learn more about that conference. Some master classes that are going to be taught there, one on more of what you've seen today, specifically tied to measuring progress toward Vision 2030. And then finally another workshop with aligning your programs using the balanced scorecard to achieve Vision 2030. If you want to learn some more, you can get a 10% discount from attending this participant. Just use December 2016. You can go online at the Balanced Scorecard Institute website and sign up for KPI professional certification. That's a 5-day boot camp with joint certification from us and George Washington University College of Professional Studies. And the Pump Blueprint Workshop is a 2-day workshop built around Stacy Barr's blueprint. The Pump Blueprint, a very popular workshop as well. And thank you. If you want a copy of the presentation, just email us at info@strategymanage.com, and we'll have it on that site and also on the Balanced Scorecard Institute site. So let's go ahead and take some questions. Joe, do you want to lead the question discussion?
Yeah, there was one question that came in, Howard, basically that asked, of all of the that we showed, what do we consider to be the most difficult of all the steps and processes that we talked about on KPI development?
There's a few things that are challenging. Excuse me, I have the cough that seems to be going around the world. One of the challenges is getting people to write a simple intended result statement. And a challenge before that, frankly, is getting the right people in the room to have that discussion. We have some guidance on who should be in the room, what kinds of talent do we look for to be part of that discussion. So getting the right people in the room is actually a first challenge. Writing a crisp intended result for the strategic objective is a critical first step. If you get the strategic objectives correct or reasonably correct, everything else goes smoothly. And if you skip that step, or if you don't treat it, if you treat it too lightly, it's a much more difficult lift, if you will, to get to good performance measures. So those are the three things. I guess the fourth challenge is there are so many measures to choose from that how do you narrow it down to a few? The technique that I like to use is once I get the intended result, I parse it, or I break it into its components. And then I ask the question, how will I measure the success of that piece of it? Then the next challenge is if you have 3 pieces to a excuse me, to an intended result, you got 3 potential measures there. And then you go back through the logic model, and you could have a half a dozen measures here and another half a dozen here. So you need to have a discussion around, look, it looks like we got about 20 possible measures for this intended result and its process all the way back to inputs. How do we narrow that down into a few that are most meaningful? Well, one way to do it is to ask ourselves, are any of those measures measuring where we have potential problems with our processes, especially our customer-facing processes? I want to make sure that one of the measures that makes it on the short list deals with breaking bottlenecks, eliminating waste, improving quality, things that stand in the way of a good customer experience. So that's another conversation, isn't it? So, all of these are conversations. That's really the important thing. That's why I said earlier, you're not going to find your answer in a book. You'll get some guidance from a book of measures, but you're really not going to find your answer there, because the answer comes from a discussion, a critical thinking discussion with the right people in the room. A lot of times we'll use something called a proxy measure. We didn't mention that earlier. A proxy measure is a measure that I'm going to use because I want to get this measurement started promptly. It may not be the best measure of all the measures, but I have some data for it and I can get started right away. So we'll use that as a proxy for the real measure that I would like to have maybe sometime in the future. Our experience is that after we build a strategy map and we put somewhere between 20 and 25 measures on 12 to 14 objectives, that's the rule of thumb. The best practices is about 10 about 12 to 14 strategic objectives on a strategy map, and somewhere around somewhere around 2 measures per objective. It gets you to 20 to 25. Our experience is that once a year, when you do the evaluation step that Joe mentioned, you will probably switch out after the first year 2 or 3 objectives, because the idea is to get it right, get it done quickly, and start using it in 2 or 3 months, which is how long it takes to build one of these systems, rather than spend a lot of time developing it, thinking you're going to get another 5 percentage points better out of the product. It's much better to go fast, high energy, get it in place and start using it and get it institutionalized into the system. So we'll get it 80 or 85% right in 2 to 3 months. At the end of a year, you'll realize that we didn't get that objective quite right. We'll reframe it. Same with the performance measures. 2 to 3, 4 measures will change at the end of a year's evaluation cycle because they're not as valuable as we thought they were. So we just stop using them and we switch them out. So the point is, this is a dynamic system of measurement and performance improvement. It is not a static system. It's not a sit-on-the-shelf system. If you're going to use it, we're going to live it. We're not just going to build it. We're actually going to use it to make choices.
Very good. A number of questions for the audience was getting the presentation and the video, and that's all going to be posted on a website that you'll be able to access, so you'll be able to get the copy of the slides and also the video of this entire webinar. Howard, I'll take the next one. Someone asked a question: in what phase of business the balanced scorecard is applicable? Can it be applied in the early stage of the business, for example, a startup? And the answer is yes, and it's not just at the early stage of a startup, because remember, one of the basic premises of the outcome of a balanced scorecard is it gives you a map of what your strategy should be, and it was a strategy that was developed, hopefully not just in the executive suite, but did a lot of drill down into the organization, regardless if it's a startup, which we know is only a few number of people. But it gets everyone on the same page as to what the strategy should be. The other aspect of your question is, and we get this often, is I'm a IT department inside of this huge organization, and they don't have anything like a balanced scorecard or even a strategy, but you know, I've been to a class, I've been to a webinar, I've looked at the Institute Weight Book, and it sounds like it's the right thing for me to do at my departmental level, and that is very much what we realize through some of our classes is that departmental people come in to build a departmental balanced scorecard or strategy. And in one case, one of my clients, the U.S. division did their balanced scorecard, and the international headquarters holding company saw what they were doing, and they picked up on it and said, we need one of these at the holding company level in terms of a balanced scorecard strategy, and then started cascading down to the other divisions as well. So the answer on that one is yes, just about any phase of the business, and also any type of organization. Let's see. All right, Howard, how about this one? For your experience, which, quote, model has been more useful when analyzing the dynamic change environment in which the firm operates?
I have found that the cause-effect model on the first pass is very powerful, because it forces you to think of what the drivers of the end result are. And it to me is the most powerful way of structuring the conversations that need to happen around how we get to a good result, because it forces you to look at things like, you know, policies and procedures and regulations, at resources, you know, at technology. I mean, you can identify whatever categories you want along the fishbone, right? It's not just set in concrete, and for different organizations you would use different categories. But I found that to be really powerful, and people get it pretty quickly because you can structure the conversation. For example, you write the end result, then you go back through the fishbone to look at a category called policies, rules, and regulations. So then you have a discussion about what components of the policies, rules, and regulations will have an impact on the end result, either positively or negatively. So starting off, that is a very powerful tool. Once you get the sort of the train moving down the tracks, my favorite is the logic model, and then applying the smart filter at the end of the logic model, because you can use the logic model so many places. I mean, one of the things that you have seen today is that we use those tools within a balanced scorecard framework. It's our step 5 of the 9-step framework, or you can use them outside of it if you're not a balanced scorecard proponent. Those tools apply standalone as well as they do integrated into the balanced scorecard system. But to me, the logic model has stood the test of time. It goes back, what, 20 or 30 years now. And it's a very nice way of organizing the end outcome all the way through to the input. So in a dynamic, changing environment, I would expect to see a lot of emphasis on efficiency, because you want to get things done quickly. Your environment is changing rapidly, or maybe building an agile strategy, right, where you got to move quickly and make changes quickly. I think that that would be the most powerful tool to use for that. I mean, always the strategy map for strategy. There's no substitute. I've been doing this for a very long time, and when the strategy map, and there's a corollary tool we use called a strategy profile, which identifies the discriminators in your business compared to your competition, or if you're government or mission driven, you can use the strategy profile to look at where you want to put emphasis on your discriminators that make you unique in the marketplace. That's another really powerful tool, not directly used for performance measurement, but used to structure your strategy and your thinking about what to do differently going forward.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, Howard. For those of you whose questions we did not get to, we'll capture your question, and hopefully we can get your email address, and Howard or I, or both of us, will reply to your questions as a follow-up to this webinar. Last question. What do you think about having a PMO, Project Management Office, inside an SMO, Strategy Management Office? Actually, I'm a very big proponent of that. It goes back to the statement I made earlier that the two fault lines in strategy execution are communications and project management execution. The PMO keeps the focus on the project management execution. The interesting, for the person that asked this question, the interesting that wave that's we're seeing in the industry across all types of organizations today is that where there's been an established PMO, they bring in a structured framework build like the Balanced Scorecards Institute's 9-step process. Once the strategies build, the PMO takes on the additional duties of being the SMO because they are, as can be expected in some organizations, at the forefront of the strategic initiatives which turn into projects that they would be managing, and then it becomes ancillary to their performance analysis of the entire organization to act like an SMO. And we've seen some SMOs take on the function of bringing a PMO in as well. So it's a matter of what's right for your organization, but the synergy between the two, extremely tight over time.
Let me add one thought to that, Joe. The other side of the ledger is be careful on setting up new organization entities. I've spent probably half my career in the federal government service, and I can always remember the pressure of trying to set up a new, what is considered a support or overhead organization, compared to putting your resources against the programs and services. So it's hard to justify an additional overhead organizations a lot of time. I think maybe the way to ask the question is, given that we need to perform these kinds of services for the organization, where's the best place to house them? And, you know, call it whatever you want to. I think it's more about what functions do we want. So let's talk about what we want in an organization that will help us implement performance management principles and deliver results to the organization. You need project management skills. You need performance measurement development skills. You need reporting skills, people who can design meaningful reports for clients. You need a financial component to this. So I would answer the question by looking at the functions and then ask yourself, for my organization at this time, what's the best way to organize that entity? I wouldn't come up with a long name, the Strategic Management Office and the Program Planning Office, right? I mean, it's about the functions that that entity needs to produce to add value to the organization. I think that's the way to look at it.
Excellent. Ryan, I think we've come to, we've gone over a few minutes, but appreciate the audience hanging tough for over an hour and a half. And Ryan, back to you for closeout moderator.
All right, well, I would just like to thank everyone for their attendance. And as Joe and Howard said, we will get answers to all the questions over to you. So if we did not get to them, we do apologize. And hopefully we will see some of you in Riyadh in December. Otherwise, that is the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.